In Europe, war was brewing again. Adolf Hitler had taken the dissatisfaction and despair in Germany and used it to twist the Germans' emotions. His Nazi party soon began to control everything in Germany, but his ambitions were higher. In 1939, the Nazi army invaded Poland. Britain and France again went to war, calling on the U.S. for help. For a second time, we resisted getting into a world war. Germany quickly conquered almost all of continental Europe. It seemed nothing could stop the Nazi machine. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese, angered by a U.S. embargo of minerals they desperately needed, launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The world would never be the same. America jumped into the fight swinging. The planner of the Japanese attack, Admiral Yamamoto, famously said that he feared Pearl Harbor had simply woken the sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. He was right. America plunged into the war in Europe, taking part in battles in North Africa and then, on June 6, 1944, Europe itself. It was D-Day, and under the command of Dwight D. Eisenhower, American forces were an important part of the Allied invasion of Normandy. At the same time, Allied victories at Midway and Guadalcanal pushed American forces closer to victory over the Japanese. The Germans surrendered first, with Berlin surrounded and Hitler dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Shortly thereafter, FDR died suddenly and was replaced by Vice President Harry Truman. It was Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb on Japan, ending the war in the face of a larger nuclear nightmare. Who could know that the nightmare would engulf the world for the next 40 years? They called it the Cold War, because no real shots were fired.
And the Germans made huge gains in the early months of the war and were soon besieging Leningrad. And that is when Shostakovich begins to write this great symphony.
Could you give us just a sense of the human toll, the numbers of dead, because it's hard to comprehend?
It is the greatest disaster that has ever befallen any great city, and that includes Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all contenders. You had, in the winter of 1941 to 1942, when Shostakovich is writing this symphony, although he's been evacuated, something of the order of 1.2 million people died, and the vast majority of them either froze to death or starved to death. They were eating, they very promptly ate every cat, rat, dog in the city. They were eating any sort of old leather there was around. Old handbags were being sold. So you had, on the absolute edge, a catastrophe.
Brian, in the midst of all of this suffering, violence, and deprivation, music is still very important in the city.
Music was extremely important, and it was soon realized that music fed the soul in a way that was extremely good for shattered morale. So a real effort was put into music in this dying city. But gradually all that winds down as fewer and fewer musicians are left alive to play, literally. And then the idea, when Shostakovich finally finishes his Seventh Symphony in February 1942, the idea is born that this great symphony must be played in Leningrad because he devotes it to the people of Leningrad.
And this performance, the annals of classical music are full of symphonic performances that are bizarre, but there is nothing I've read that's like this.
There's nothing. This was written as the event is taking place and played as this event, the greatest loss of life in one city ever recorded. It's played as that takes place. So it has that extraordinary impact. I can't think of another piece of music ever that has that.
That's Brian Moynihan. His new book is called Leningrad, Siege and Symphony, and it's out now. Brian, thanks very much.
It was absolutely my pleasure.